Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about emphasis or the accent. So in MIDI land, we have extraordinary options over the way our notes sound. And this is a very basic concept. There's a whole bunch of different sort of variations on the idea of an accent. There's all these different articulation styles that happen in written music. And the reason is, let's really quick talk about this. Why is an accent necessary? Well, normally we're in an equal beat world. Every beat has an equal chance. So for example, here we've got 4 kick notes and they all receive the first a beat and they all are the same volume. You can see down here by velocity, they are all the same volume. And so when we play it, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, like they're all exactly the same. They're all the same length. Everything's the same. And what's really neat is we have very particular control over all of these factors. So if we were to play it, that's like not as so interesting. Now in a 4/4 measure, naturally the first beat will get the accent. So let me really quick lay down something for you. So when we're playing a measure, we've agreed to a meter of some kind. In written music, it's there. Like that's a thing that we need to deal with. And when we agree to a meter, we've also agreed to the length of notes. So if we have a 4/4 meter, we've agreed that the quarter note is going to be a quarter of our measure. It's going to be a quarter. It's going to get 1 beat in a 4/4 system. So when we agree to these notes and things, what we have done is we've also made it impossible to get to other rhythms, especially in written music. And now here we have a huge power available to us, which we're going to get to. So here in written music, you can't fudge a quarter note. Like it's there. You can go half or double it, or you can even do half of a half using different methods. You could write out eighth notes in a configuration tied together with other notes, and you could come up with different values, but there are certain values you'll never get. Here, you can scroll continuously between values. That makes this very powerful. Now that's how we deal with that here. In written music, you have all these signs, these little symbols that tell a musician how to interpret this. So it says, I know I wrote down a quarter note, but I want you to interpret it so it's a little bit shorter than a quarter note. And there's different styles and intuitiveness that goes along with that. So when we're working in a piano roll, it's our job to create the same sort of feeling. So in case you're not aware, you have something in your DAW called pulse per quarter note. It is the smallest amount you can move on a grid. In most DAWs, it's 960. If you come over here it's in one of these. Here we go. Time-based pulse per quarter. Mine's at 96, but you can go all the way down to 960 and get really specific. This controls how far you can zoom in, essentially, and how the smallest amount you can nudge. So a pulse per quarter note. Now we now are able to sort of talk about this. So we know that there's one beat, right? There's one. And in that beat, you can have 960 tiny movements. That's what we just set it to, is 960. So if our BPM, if our tempo is faster, if it's at like 200 beats per minute, the amount we're going to be able to move is proportionally so much smaller. If we have a bigger BPM, like beats per minute, if we have it at like 80, well, the beats are much farther spaced apart, so our smallest amount we can nudge is not so big anymore. So these are things that we need to be aware of. It also takes a lot more processing. So usually it's not that necessary to have 960. It's almost overkill. You may consider going down to 96 to save on CPU power. But I'm going to leave it on 960 for now. So this allows us to do things like create very different rhythms. Now these rhythms, if we put it like a little bit after the beat, right? Like we move it just a little bit off or a little bit on. These rhythms allow us to create, styles. So something in written music land is staccato. What staccato means is shorter. So if you put a little dot above a note in written music land, that means, hey, play this note's shorter. Not necessarily short, like da, just like, let's say the note was da, then it would just be duh. It'd just be shorter. It's the same, ideally it's the same volume, same everything, just shorter. So there's space between notes. I believe it means spaced. I can't remember. There's a really important distinction. It doesn't mean short though. It just means shorter. Spaced. I believe it means spaced. I don't remember. It's one of those. It's a big deal. And it's kind of a bad thing that I forgot it at this particular moment, but it's whatever. It'll come back to me because I've been in so many classes where that was like discussed and people were playing their staccatos and giving them additional emphasis and all this junk that they shouldn't be doing. So again, in written music, when they see these symbols, not only do they play them differently, but the timbre that they play it with changes. For example, if you're playing a clarinet and you play it and there's an accent coming up, they're going to play it louder. They're going to approach it, the volume curve, how fast it gets loud, how fast it gets soft. At what point is the beat in the beat is the note the loudest? The frequency content of the air changes, the calm of the air, and the way their tongue hits their teeth to articulate the note, and all these things change. Frequency response to the horn changes, and these things vary with temperatures and things. So the temperature things may not be a necessary point, but all these different things, all I'm saying is we as MIDI, we need ways to simulate all of this. Now, most of the time, dealing with all that other stuff will only happen when you have multi-mapped sampled instruments, like things like Contact. Go check out my Contact series if you're curious about that. But here we can do a great number of things. One of them is we can control the velocity and how they land on the note. So let's get to the bulk of what this video is actually about, which will only take a couple seconds. That is emphasis, accent. So an accent, I'm going to teach you what the legato accent is. So legato means like smooth. So it's a smooth thing. So if I were like a clarinet player and I saw play this line legato and my line went like da 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 da, like, well, that I was a little flat on that last one, or sharp, I don't even remember. But anyways, that was legato. So everything was flowing. It was all still separate notes. There were clear articulations, but they went da 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 versus staccato, which would be spaced out, shorter. So it'd be da, 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 da. Not one of my notes was emphasized. At least it's not supposed to be. So here, when we have a rhythm like this, so we're working with rhythm, and so we're going to create these styles, but we can give emphasis to certain beats. So legato accent will give one note more emphasis than another. So it'd be like da, 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 da. Like that beat one is what I was seeing was the one that got the emphasis. This allows us to take a boring thing like this. Well, this first note sounds funny. And we could turn it up like this. See how we get that movement now? Do, 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 do. And this allows us to create really complicated rhythms and syncopations, which we'll talk about later, and all these different things. This is a super, super duper important thing. People all the time will make just general observations like, oh, I want to make it sound like a real drummer, so I'm going to vary my velocities and junk. And they'll oftentimes do this, but ideally, you're going to do this with more than the idea that you just want to fake your stuff into sounding real. Ideally, you're going to do it with some creative inspirations, greater and grander than the vision, to meet a creative vision, not to just try and emulate someone playing an instrument. Like, that's not that cool, man. It's way cooler to be moving towards some vision, some goal. And so we'll use this emphasis to create rhythm. So normally, in a 4/4 measure, the standard rhythm, which we'll talk about later, is an emphasis on beat 1 and then 1, 2, 3. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3. I'm actually rushing right now. I'm speeding up, which I shouldn't be doing. But there's 1 right here is what's getting our beat. And I'm counting the first beat of each measure as the start of the next measure. So measure 1, measure 2, measure 3. That's why it changes numbers. But so here, this is what it theoretically should sound like. Like, that's your stereotypical, oh, I just realized some of why it sounds weird to have it up an octave, but that's your stereotypical rhythm, like 1, 2, 3, 4, da 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 da. I'm just too focused to realize where my notes are. And this kick just sounds horrid too, but that's fine. So that's that. So you could vary up the rhythm. You could say, hey, no, I want this instead, and emphasize those beats. I use this all the time. I'll layer kicks together in ways to do this. So that's a really interesting deal. Now, what we can do is we can create a subdivision, and we could take each one of these notes, and you can do that by holding down Control Shift. At least that's the way I know how to do it. We can make these softer. So now we're creating this like this pattern of emphasis. So these are more emphasized. These ones are accented. These are the accented notes. And you can see that they are brighter if they're louder, which is a nice thing FL does. Lots of other DAWs do that as well. Versus our original, which just sounded like this. Oh, you know what? I'm off. This thing is off by... Let me real quick just come in here and make it the correct note value. There's another reason why pulse per quarter note may not be the best thing to make it super short. Okay, so originally they were all the same level. I know these aren't all. I should actually be able to just. There we go. So there's a small decrease in volume right here. I do not know what's causing that, but it shouldn't be there. But anyways, that is what allows us to create our rhythms. That's not so interesting. And then we could say, hey, you know, make every other one accented. And so there's a couple different kinds of accents. There's one where it's like da da, like really strong front attack. Those are called marcatos. They look like little TPs in written music. They're little triangles with no bottom part over your notes. The accents are ones that they point the way your music's going, and they just look like greater than signs or less than signs. What is that? X is greater than. Yeah, I believe it's greater than sign. I'm a math tutor, but no one, you know, you draw it out and you're like, this is greater than that. So I guess that's a greater than sign. So anyways, those are longer, more legato feeling. And I'll have one where I go over terms like that and try to sort of quantify it in the MIDI world so that we can deal with that. So anyways, that is emphasis. That's what it allows you to do. Now, if you can imagine, we could create emphasis with our kick, with our snare, with our hi-hat, with the notes playing. This is like a huge underused tool by a lot of people. Now, there's one other thing in MIDI land that we need to be aware of, and that is the ability we have to create contours. So I've got a VST right here called Harmor Open, and what instruments will do is, it's more intuitive to deal with it here, but occasionally you may come in here and go to the volume. Down here you may change it to channel volume, and you can make volume changes during particular notes. And what I'm going to say is this graph represents it turning on. I have a whole series on Harmor in case you're interested in learning. But as you see, our note volume starts at 0, and then it turns on, reaches some value, and then it goes down after that. So we can actually make it turn on slower or faster. So check this out. Whoops, let me select Harmor. Oh man, that's right. This DAW. All right, I'm just going to put down a note. My MIDI stuff is on my other instance of FL for reasons. So as you can see here, we get this whooshing of it coming in. Now, if we turn it up, let me turn my metronome off. So there's that. There's that. We can make it peak more. We can make it pop at the beginning. So you see we have all these options, and each one of these contours can be compared to a stylistic playing style. Now what's difficult, believe me, it's difficult, is to make something sound staccato as an instrument would, and then change into a legato thing naturally. That is just ridiculously hard to do. It's one of the reasons why electronic VSTs sound like that. The day they figure out how to automate these things is like gonna be a revolutionary day. There are methods to do it, but it's more difficult than it sounds. But if you want something to sound a particular way or emulate a particular instrument or a particular style, you may create a contour envelope. This is called when you shape the attack so that maybe it doesn't get loud right at the beginning, but it reaches this point within the beat that it reaches some value, and then it comes down, and then it comes down to like its sustained level. Now, I recommend watching. I have a couple videos on envelopes. One of them's in my ADSR. I cover the ADSR envelope, and it's in my Sound and Synth Basics. ADSR is a great YouTube channel too. There's one in the Harmor series, and anything that says from the ground up probably has an envelope, except for the series I believe on Harmless. I don't believe Harmless, they don't have envelopes like this. Harmless has an envelope but it's a different style. So you're going to look for an envelope like this. Citrus or Harmer are the ones I recommend checking out if you're curious about how some of these envelopes work and their functions. But you're going to do that there. You're not necessarily going to do this in the MIDI and the piano roll. However, you can come in here, and if you feel so desired, you could create a channel envelope, and you could also create an event that channels along with these. But those are like, I don't have any tutorials on events yet, but in here you could control, like, you could do something like that, and you could shape your contour really specifically for each note. And if you're serious and you know what you're going for, this might be the easiest way to do what you're looking to do, surprisingly. However, envelopes are probably it's going to be far more intuitive and less intensive. But if you want to be super duper specific, this may be your best option. And if I was going to do this and I wanted to rely on that, I would make it so my envelope was something like this, so that I could completely control the release and everything based off that. But if I did it that way, then I'd have to make sure my notes were all the length that I wanted them, so that I had all the releases, and I could be so particular. But this is like the nitty gritty way. But if you really want to step up your game, you may go to that level of detail. Personally, I only do this with strings and things that I want giant swells and stuff, but it's all up to you. So again, most DAWs will allow you to control volume, but it's the same thing as just automating like a mixer fader track. Like, it's the same thing as moving one of these around. So hopefully you get the idea of emphasis and how it's important, some ways to use it. It's more about volume, but I'm talking about in a beat, how you can give emphasis to beat 1 and beat 3. I got a little sidetrack there with some sound design, but you could do that. Now in Harmer, you could also create a sequence that would allow you to do a similar thing. You could turn this beat down, this beat up, and do things like that. So it's all up to you. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.